Without further ado, I'm going to say welcome to Steve Murphy, who's our speaker tonight for the Tennessee Native Plant Society's Native Plant Seminar Series. And Steve is an entomologist, a native of Middle Tennessee, who has been a member of the biology faculty at Belmont University since 1991. He holds a PhD in entomology from Auburn University and BS and MS degrees in biology from Middle Tennessee State University. He's a specialist on biting midges and maintains the international research website for these small flies. Very annoying little flies, I think. Dr. Murphy is a medical veterinary structural entomologist with broad interests in ecology and the interface of science and faith. In addition to teaching and mentoring undergraduate research, he is active in community service. Dr. Murphy is a frequent contributor of articles about arthropods to the Tennessee Conservationist magazine. I'm sure many of you have seen them. He has taught summer insect day camps for children since 1992 and has visited many elementary school classrooms, scout groups, and nature centers in Middle Tennessee. Dr. Murphree has served as president of the Tennessee Entomological Society and the Tennessee Academy of Science. He received Belmont's Presidential Faculty Achievement Award and was named the Tennessee Environmental Education Association's Environmental Educator of the Year and the Tennessee Science Teachers Association Science Educator of the Year for higher education. He's been a member of the Sam Davis Memorial Association's Board of Directors since 2014 and was elected president in 2016. A member of the Duck River Beekeepers Association, he maintains an apiary at the historic Sam Davis home and plantation. Steve and his wife, Kay, the parents of 4 adult children, live in Murfreesboro, Tennessee. And I can say that he's also, one thing he didn't have in there is he's also been an instructor for the Tennessee Naturalist program for many of the chapters up around the Nashville area. And he's a very sought after speaker, so I feel honored to have his presence tonight.
Thank you so much, Karen. That was kind of you to say that. And as most people noticed, I am a medical veterinary structural entomologist. That means I work with termite research from time to time too. I am going to go ahead, if I'm still available here, let's see.
You should be.
Okay, I've just let's see what it's doing here. Well, I'm gonna go ahead and try the share if it'll let me.
Sure, it should hit the share screen and then it should bring up your...
It's just a little different looking coming from the browser here. Let's see. Here we go. All right. Okay. Now, can you see this?
Yes, we can see hibiscus turret bee.
All right. Well, I need to come up here to the front of this and get started then. Let me ask you this. If I go to presenter view, do you see the presenter view also? Or
I can see 2 areas, the slide and then Steve Murphy's background.
Okay, I'm probably just gonna get out.
What you had a moment ago was better.
Yeah, let's do that. Sometimes it's
good.
Sometimes you can look at the presenter view on your computer, but not on the screen. So anyway, this is a example of a very good pollinator of an important flower in Middle Tennessee, the eastern purple coneflower, which thankfully is no longer on the endangered species list. Can anybody remember when this was on a phone book as a photograph? Who's seen a phone book in recent years anyway, but I can remember this was on the local Bell South phone book or whatever when it was still considered endangered. So we're going to talk about insect pollinators and a few other things as well. And again, I think if there are questions, you can put those in the chat, and then Karen will ask those as we go. So, all right. Well, this is me a little younger with one of the bug camp groups that I'm down to just 2 a summer now. I used to do 3 or 4 weeks of these, and these kids often see insect-plant relationships that I've looked over. They're very good, very keen in seeing things and pointing out. And the landscaping crew at Belmont's very forgiving. Sometimes they'll bring me a net they found somewhere. Uh, but anyway, I'm a native of Bedford County. I was born in Hickman, but grew up in Bedford County, and very active in the 4-H club. I had an entomology project, and I remember distinctly doing one when on the 13-year cicadas, which again, that might be another talk another day, because 2024 is when the big brood emerges and won't really hurt our native trees and shrubs that much as it will maybe perhaps some of the non-native ones when the females lay their eggs. But I also have directed some research at Belmont. Dr. David Hill, who's listening, is very familiar with that. This is a tradition that still continues here in the biology department. Okay, let's talk about what pollination is, just some of the basics here. And of course, it's moving pollen grains from the stamens that produce them to ovules, ultimately, and if it's cross-pollination, into another flower. And of course, there's a method in which the pollen produces a pollen tube, and in the Principles of Biology 2 course here at Belmont, we do look at how that tube is an important feature in natural selection, that it eliminates, if the pollen grains don't get outright killed on the top of the stigma of incorrect species, then at least the pollen tube will not grow the correct length to get the nuclei down to the ovule and such. So, of course, it's very important in production of fruit and seed crops, and pollination by both non-native bees like honeybees, but then our native bees, of which there's quite a range of size and specificity of those that are out there. Very important. So this is just an estimate: 25% of all birds, and of mammals ranging from white-footed deer mice to black bears. Probably many of you out looking at plants in nature have come across some scat or some mammal feces and seen some seeds in that from seed-bearing fruits of plants that were pollinated by insects. So going back even older than I am here, some 65 million to 225 million years ago, Mesozoic era, when the dinosaurs dominated the planet, is when we think the earliest flowering plants appeared. And you all will know that some of these primitive flowers that we see today are rather large, like the southern magnolia, one of my favorites. And those flowers look something like that. And probably the first pollinators were something like beetles or flies. But this coevolution between the insects and the flowering plants is a very detailed thing, very interesting to look at. I had to throw this in here because we teach this here at Belmont to our freshman biology students, but just I threw it in here so you can see where the pollen grains, of course, is transfer from the anthers, transferred by wind, or in the case of our talk today, transferred by insects to the stigma, the surface of the female portion of plants. And then, of course, the pollen tubes grow the correct length in the 2 nuclei that are able to do what we refer to as double fertilization within the embryo sac or the female gametophyte here. So won't get into that detail, but the zygote is going to become the plant, and the endosperm, the triploid endosperm, will become the food for that seed to germinate with. Okay, so this mutualistic relationship has been around for a while, and cross-fertilization, of course, is what we're interested in tonight, is what's going on there. However, there are always other threats that, that have evolved out there, herbivores that will feed on flowers, that don't participate in moving pollen. There are nectar thieves or nectar robbers that I'll mention again in a moment, that will visit the flower to get the nectar rewards, but they don't move the pollen. And there's a famous quote about that from Charles Darwin that we'll look at. And so there are these selective pressures, and we refer to this as natural selection in the parlance of evolutionary theory. But these pressures between, the flowers getting adapted so they restrict their visitors to those that are acquiring nectar, but also able to move the pollen. And often you see these big adaptations in the floral anatomy that are just pretty impressive when we see them. I'll show you a couple examples of these. And of course, this is the one here. The Charles Darwin had predicted that he saw when he was shown this this orchid from Madagascar way back in 1862, just a year or two before Darwin died. It's got a structure that extends really 12 inches or a foot below the flower, and that's where the nectar is, and this nectary. And so he predicted there had to be an insect, and probably a hawk moth on Madagascar, that just had not been collected yet, that had a tongue long enough to extend, and its proboscis get down in there. The entomologist didn't think that insect existed, but of course, about 20 years later, 40 years later, we see the moth collected. And of course, they named it the subspecies, because of Darwin, Predicta, because he predicted it was there. So here's what that plant looks like, this orchid, and you can see how long that we'll call it a nectar tube is there. And then you can capture hawk moths that occur in Tennessee. I'll show you one in the next slide. And I like to get these when I have opportunities to teach children, because you can hold the moth and take just a pin or a needle and roll out its tongue. And sometimes they're longer than you expect them to be, but certainly not as long as this hawk moth pollinator from over in the Indian Ocean. And here's something more close to home. But you probably know that, of course, flowers that you see that bloom in the evening typically don't have any flower at all. There's no reason to, and they're often very aromatic. And so this is a moonflower, and one of the hawk moths. This could either be the tobacco worm hawk moth or the tomato worm. And of course, you will know that their caterpillars can do a number on your tomato plants. And the caterpillars have a little puppy dog tail, so we call them hornworms. But this is just a great photograph of the extension of the rather prodigious tongue of one of our native hawk moths here in Tennessee. So if it goes all the way down in here and finds a nectar reward, then it's going to get dusted with pollen and be a good pollinator. And of course, our pollinators are, the bees that and other insects that visit flowers, like this Lepidopteran example, this moth, they have different goals out there. The European honeybee, the non-native bee that's still with us a lot, but in trouble to some degree now, is mostly after nectar. But they do collect pollen during the warm parts of the year when the queen is laying eggs and more pollen is needed. But the honeybees, of course, have to store up enough energy since they remain in their colony during the winter. And beekeepers like me have to be careful not to take off too much honey each late summer, so that they'll have enough honey to make it through the winter and survive. Okay, so there are idea of looking at nectar robbers or nectar thieves, and this is the Darwin again making a statement here that it makes good sense that he would make this statement. If you've got a felonious bee that's cutting a hole in the base of a flower because its mouth parts are too short to reach down there and get it, and hence get dusted with pollen, that seems almost unfair. And Darwin thought that those plants would not set as much seed And that was a legitimate idea. However, one of our speakers here at Belmont a few years back from Salisbury State University in Maryland, I believe it is, Joan Maloof, did a comprehensive study, her PhD study in the Rockies, and they found that they do not have a negative effect on pollination and seed set. So, so here's somebody who proved Darwin wrong, at least at one point, in terms of the rewards and what happens. So, of course, carpenter bees, we're all familiar with carpenter bees. One of our large native bees are I'm not sure what this plant is. Maybe somebody recognizes it, but doesn't have the mouth parts to get in that flower, but will cut in and get a nectar reward. Okay, so here's an example of not a carpenter bee, but another two species in the genus Bombus, bumblebees, and the one on the right is a good pollinator of flowers. It's got a tongue long enough to reach down so it gets dusted with pollen, and also can pick up that pollen and carry it on its baskets on its rear legs. But this is a nectar robber, another species in the same genus that does not have those mouth parts to go in the flower. All right, so many of you will be familiar with the fact that Ed Wilson, E.O. Wilson, passed in recent months, and had an opportunity to hear him speak at Vanderbilt several years ago. And he's, of course, known for a number of things, but here's a pretty good quote from his book, The Diversity of Life, about what we see when we look at flowers, and then we think about those specialist pollinators that are out there. Some of these relationships we still do not understand very well as they work with these flowers in this coevolution that continues. So bees, of course, are the most abundant pollinators, but butterflies do, beetles do, flies, a lot of other groups do. And here's another example, not from here in the States, but over in South Africa. There is a fly that's called the mega-nosed fly. And boy, does it have a long proboscis like that hawk moth we saw from Madagascar. And sometimes this tactic that plants have evolved, to get a longer distance down to where the nectar is, so specific pollinators would come in, and sometimes it would kind of backfire on them. And so sometimes pollen from another species like this iris gets on this geranium, and vice versa. And you can see there's pollen will get on different parts of the anatomy of these flies that mimic bees, but still doesn't work quite as well as you might think it would. Again, if the wrong pollen gets there, there's usually other mechanisms that will shut down that apparent movement towards a hybrid plant between these. I don't think you can get a hybrid between an iris and a geranium, of course. All right, just some other illustrations here of some things besides insects that can serve as pollinators. Some are very highly specialized. If you know the yucca plant, which has helped me with this, but I think it's mostly native to the southwestern United States. We see some of it here. There is a moth that is the sole pollinator of this plant, and its caterpillars actually feed on it as well. So there are species that produce foul-smelling odors. I'll show you another example in a moment. And so here's a blowfly that would come to a dead animal carcass and lay its eggs. You can see this fly has laid eggs, and it's been tricked into laying eggs by the smell of this flower. And of course, there's nothing's going to happen there once those hatch into larvae. There are bats, of course, that feed on flowers and hence move pollen from flower to flower. Like I don't much think there's any here in Tennessee that would work on our native cacti, though, that would transfer the other pollinators besides, say, little brown bats and such that would do that. And of course, hummingbirds that are attracted to red colors, you've seen them do that. And of course, they have these long nectaries here where they can pick up that energy source. Okay, of course, pollinators can see in the UV range a very common flower that my neighbors, I think, believe I have too many of them in my yard right now in Murfreesboro, but under UV light, of course, the insects see a different signal from us. Here's where to land for a pollen reward, for a nectar reward. These are the excuse me, the most diverse orders of insects, and then we can look at the top four up there. Are the most common ones, that also some of which can serve as pollinators. And the most abundant species of diverse would be the bees within the Hymenoptera, but there are a number of flies, a number of butterflies and moths and beetles that can also be effective pollinators. All right, and of course, Tennessee coneflower is one that has received a lot of attention. I mentioned that at the beginning of the presentation. And we know from research that's been published back in the 70s and 90s that, of course, bumblebees, honeybees, butterflies like the buckeye, and sulfurs and whites like the cabbage butterfly, but also the cloudless sulfur are known to be pollinators of this plant. And with its rather restricted distribution, maybe it's known from other counties in the mid-state by now, I'm not sure. You would know that better than me. But here is, of course, because the flowers are rather unscented, they're more likely to bring in these flies, bees, beetles, and bumblebees, of course, have been seen to move very rapidly among these flowering plants, and very likely are the most important pollinators. Bumblebees are our only native social insect. Of course, the honeybee is not native, though it's been here since the first European settlers got to the New World. And so we've seen that picture before of one of the bumblebees. In this case, it's a carpenter bee on the Tennessee purple coneflower. Now, of course, butterfly bushes, of course, non-native, but they will attract nectar-seeking insects, but they don't provide any food for their larvae. And here's an example of one of the hawk moths that's evolved to look like, to fly it in the daytime, and it's in the snowberry moth family, these day flowers like this. There's 2 or 3 species of those. Of course, butterfly weed, you can see a couple different butterflies here. These look to be, well, I'm going to think of hair streaks perhaps on this, and then a small native bee pollinator here. Kind of hard to tell which one. But these colors, orange flower, not very fragrant, but a broad range of visitors like bees, butterflies, and some large flies can visit. This might actually be, although it looks to me more like a bee, it could be a flower fly that mimics bees, many species of those. Of course, tiger swallowtails will visit milkweeds. This is probably Asclepias tuberosa, but they are known to be pollinators. They're not anything like as good a pollinator as the bees are, but they make for good photos, and they do go after nectar, and they do transfer pollen. The zebra swallowtail, host plant for its caterpillar is actually pawpaw, and understand that pawpaw has recently, at least in many areas in Middle Tennessee, become ripe, and of course I can remember a article in Tennessee Conservationist magazine a few years ago by Aubrey Watson about pawpaw, which is he referred to as Tennessee's banana. The thing is, look at these flowers here, and you can see these as you walk up to the spillway area from the Nature Center at Radnor Lake. And these flowers are kind of red, they're pointing downward. If you were to smell them, they smell kind of fetid, almost like there's a dead animal around. And sure enough, whoops, I thought I had another image of these, but perhaps I don't. That would show that that flower and some of the flies that go in and pollinated and lay their eggs like the image I showed you a while ago. Of course, by the way, as an aside here, the zebra swallowtail butterfly, which you can see on butterfly weed here, I believe, is good example of well, it is one of Tennessee's state insects. It is our state butterfly. Tennessee has 4 state insects, more than any other state, by the way. And one of them is not native, and that is the European honeybee, the agricultural insect. All right, some other examples of colors of flowers and flowers that you would see blooming in the summertime here. There is nectar present in these tiger lilies, and they are visited a lot by swallowtails, like the tiger swallowtail, like the zebra, and others. There are flowers that are pollinated by moths, and so the spider lily is a good example of that. Again, being a moth night pollinated flower, no color necessary, right, but often very aromatic, so that the strong scent, so that the moths will find them. And this is a strange one here. You have to almost take an entomology course to know what a thrips is, but thrips are in the order Thysanoptera, and they are small little things. And by the way, the common name for just a single one of these is still called thrips, like it's plural. This is a species in the genus Heterothrips, and you'll all be familiar with Jack in the Pulpit, of course. And if you look closely down around its flowering structure, you'll find these tiny little insects. These are some immatures, some nymphs, and some adults. And it's interesting that they're the pollinator, but they're also the herbivore. So it's almost approaching sort of a mutualistic relationship, like the well, I'll think of it in a minute here. The moth I showed you before, whose caterpillars feeds on another plant that we have here in our landscape settings. Okay, this is arrowwood, and this is a good example of a flower that has sometimes these sterile flowers around the edge that help as landing sites for insects like this longhorn beetle, Cerambycid, that would go up mostly for pollen and some superficial nectar. So this is a good example of a kind of a yellow colored flower that typically would attract these types of pollinators. Okay, here's the other one. I thought I had this in the same place. I didn't move it like I thought I had. This is the good example of the pawpaw flower that you can see, and what it looks like on those understory trees that you'd see at places like Radnor Lake and many places. But again, beetles and flies because of that fetid odor. And I bet you've seen that one before. Okay, this is one that I thought I'd put an acknowledgement on, but I did not. This is a photograph taken by the assistant state naturalist, Holly Taylor. And this is an insect called a conopid, or a thick-headed fly, that has evolved to look like wasp. And it can be a pollinator on flowers. I don't recognize this flower myself. Perhaps someone else does. You can also see what is clearly a sweat bee over here, a halictid. I'll show you more of those in a moment. You've probably been stung by a halictid or sweat bee if you've been sweaty and they've been at the and you close your arm at the elbow and you've got a little sting from them. Okay, well, let's look at the bees in more detail here. Of course, the bees are a big group, and this is from the Tree of Life web. You can go to this web resource you see at the top up there, and you can click down to a number of different groups. They keep this classifications fairly up to date as you work through these from the outer part of this website forward. So we can see some of the groups here that are known that we'll look at: the halictids, or the sweat bees, the leafcutter bees down here, and of course the big family Apidae that has the honeybees, the bumblebees, carpenter bees, cuckoo bees, and such in there. Perhaps maybe you've heard why an insect is called a cuckoo bee. There's also another insect called a cuckoo wasp. It's because they're parasites, just like the cuckoo bird is a nest parasite and will go and lay its eggs in the nest of some other hapless bird while they're gone and let them raise their young for them, just like cowbirds do here in the States. Well, there are cuckoo bees that do similar things here in that situation. So of course our native bees are very, very important to us. Most of them are after pollen instead of nectar rewards, and most of them are solitary, and they live. They're the burrowing bees. They live in the ground. Maybe 70% of our native bee species do. I think I had some numbers here. I think there's 4,000 species that are known of native bees, and most of them, while the females have stingers, most of them will not attempt to sting you. The sweat bees are an exception, of course, but most of them do not. And we'll look at some examples of them as we come up here. But lots of range here of color from 1/8 of an inch to more than an inch. I was looking at a guide here. You'll see it in the references later, and I doubt you'll be able to see it if I hold this up necessarily. I should have scanned this first slide, but one of the larger native bees next to the smallest bee here on that. So there's quite a range in size of these things, and quite a range in color too. Some of them, of course, bright colored if they are able to sting you, and contrasting colors, they advertise that. So they build their nests in lots of places in the ground. They cut sections of leaves out to line their nest. They make the mason bees construct areas or construct their nest that look almost like pottery. There's a lot of variety of these things, and so they've always been here. The non-native bee, like the European honeybee, and then I'll show you another one called the giant resin bee that's new, relatively new. Are a little bit different, and they tend to, especially the giant resin bee, would definitely pollinates and gets nectar rewards, but it generally prefers the species from Asia where it's from that happen to have been introduced here as well in homes and gardens. Well, of course, flowers, as I've said, have evolved to the point where they are trying to restrict what kinds of insects will go into them, and to assure that they're going to get pollen transfer from one insect to another. And there's all these elaborate sorts of things. And I can think of one example called the hammer orchid from down in Australia, where there's a structure that looks just like a female bee, and the males emerge first, and they'll land on it and try to mate with it. And of course, they get just like any type of orchid is going to put these two little pollen structures on their head, make them look kind of silly, and then they will fly to another flower and transfer those. So all these elaborate things, especially among the orchids. But this is the catalpa tree, of course, which I've always enjoyed here in the state. And so you can see this has got a little landing strip here, and it's meant for smart insects like bumblebees to go into, and some of the larger native bees to fit in there just right so they get dusted good with pollen and can transfer it. Okay, we have other flowers, other colors, like the trumpet creeper here, that of course doesn't have much of a scent to it, but it's got nectar in it, and it's going to attract, with that red color, clearly hummingbirds and some of the large bees. Excuse me, we'll go into that. Seemed like there was somebody at Vanderbilt a few years ago that was doing a genetic or DNA study on trumpet creeper in this area. Okay, of course, honeybees are non-native bees. You may recognize this flower that it's on. This is glade cress, I believe, that this female worker's on. And as in the honeybee parlance, we call it a field bee. So they do pollinate a lot of flowers. If honeybees were gone, we would have some adjustments, but many believe that native bees, in particular the blue orchard bee, which I'll show you a picture of in a minute, may take over pollination if honeybees do go locally extinct due to colony collapse disorder, as well as varroa mites, and you don't hear as much about the tracheal mites these days. This is sort of a dated picture here, but I do have 3 hives, not all right here on this stand at the Sam Davis home in Smyrna. This hive here produced about 20 gallons of honey last year and impressed me quite a bit.
Wow.
So again, I am a beekeeper, and you're always learning if you're a beekeeper, and again, I'm have become a kind of a fan of the honeybee. I know a lot of people would prefer the native bees over the European bees, and in fact, they may go locally extinct in some areas of Eastern North America. And but you know that even though it's much more difficult and expensive to keep bees now, there are people out there that want to keep honeybees, want to learn how to be a beekeeper and get set up to do this, even though there's all these challenges, try to control the mites and other and diseases that honeybees face in these apiaries like this one. So what if honeybees were gone? We're talking about colony collapse disorder, and there have been teams that have worked on this that are much more well-versed in honeybee physiology and such than I am, and they still haven't quite put their finger on it, what's causing all these colonies to die in the winter. But of course, these native bees are becoming more important pollinators in areas where there have been a lot of honeybees that have gone extinct locally. Of course, there have always been these native plants, and of course, the native bees. Some of them are imperiled somewhat in areas where there just are a lot of honeybees, because the honeybees will go in and get those nectar and pollen rewards and kind of clean those flowers out where the native bees cannot receive that. But so there are lots of differences of opinions about whether the native bees, like the blue orchard bee, could take over. There have been some studies on this by the specialists. So let's look at some of the examples of bees here. I know this looks a little bit like a honeybee, but it's not. It's in the family Adrenidae. These are mining bees, so typically they're ground burrowers. I know when I take students out to the Little Harpeth River each March or April to do some studies of aquatic insects, we often see these little bees that have their burrows in the stream bank. And I have to tell the students, don't be afraid, they're not going to sting you. They're a good example of a solitary native bee provisioning their nest with pollen and raising their brood within those. By the way, this is a good example of a wing pattern of a bee. And of course, if you're going to be a bee taxonomist, it's more than just that, but this is one way to get started. You need to learn these cells and the names of them and the veins in order to get a proper identification. Okay, there are other bees in the family Coletidae, and these are called plasterer bees, yellow-faced bees, and cellophane bees, I believe. And so you can see, you may have seen some of these on flowers before. Clearly, you can see why this one is called a yellow-faced bee. This looks like it might be on a sunflower. I'm not sure, but I've come across representatives of all of these as I've been out in the field observing, photographing these bees. Here is a cellophane bee, so genus Coletes. You can see that same family, Coletidae. And the reason they call those cellophane bees is their structures that they produce are almost see-through like cellophane, that they provision with pollen and such and raise their young, their brood in. This one, many of you know Rita Venable. I don't know if Rita's out there tonight or not, but this is an excellent photo that she shared in April of this year. Okay, so we can look at the sweat bees. This is just a wonderful photograph, close up of one of these. Most of them aren't very large bees, but they're often bright iridescent greens and blues. And again, females can sting if they feel like they're going to be crushed. As such, they're not very aggressive other than that. And so I've got just a couple of examples of these for you to see. This is a different genus, Lasia glossum, and it's sort of a bronze color, isn't it? So it's not quite as bright. Sometimes they can be a little bit furrier or more seedy than some of the other ones. But the family name is Halictidae, and there are many species of these. Some of the smallest native bees are sweat bees. Here's an example of a mason bee. This is the leafcutter bee family, Megachilidae, and they are some of them are sort of an iridescent color to them, but much furrier, much more seedy than you'd see on the sweat bees, and they're larger bees also. This is the genus of bees that they think could take over if the European honeybee goes locally extinct. And so these are really neat ones. Here is one that Holly Taylor took a photograph of on her finger, posed for her really well there. And you can see, again, there's one of these in particular. I'll tell you the scientific name of it here. The blue orchard bee, Osmia lignaria. It's about 2/3 the size of a honeybee. You can kind of get that idea by looking at this illustration. And it could be a substitute pollinator for us. Again, that is a possibility. Okay, the leafcutter bees are, if you've seen these before, especially if they have pollen, they store their pollen right on these hairs or setae on the venter of their abdomen. And so that's a clear sign that it's a leafcutter bee. If you see that, it's dry pollen there. Anytime you have a place that collects pollen, it's called a scopa or scopi plurals. But in this case, that's on the ventral side of the abdomen, but on the honeybee, bumblebee family Apidae, of course, they have these little scopa areas on their rear legs to store their pollen and carry it. And so here's what, this is a photo that Holly Taylor took also. You'll probably know the plant. I don't recognize it, but you can see, it's like a vine, but you can see where the leafcutter bees have removed sections of leaf that they will use to fold into their burrows. Sometimes leafcutter bees will even build along the edge of a door frame on a home or other building. Maybe you've come across those before, and the leaves kind of dry, and you wonder what they are, and start prying those apart. You'll see the different stages where they provision them with pollen, and perhaps the adult bees have already emerged from those leafcutter bees, the Megachilidae. Here's an example of an introduced species. It hasn't been in the States that long. It's called the giant resin bee, and I have collected these on a plant that my sister gave to my dad, and it's now rather large in his yard. It's called Vitex. I believe it's an introduced plant as well, and it almost never has honeybees on it, but it has all kinds of other native bees, including this non-native bee, the giant resin bee. Now, if you see these, this is a female, and look at the face of this. This is a male. There's other differences in the abdomen, but you get the idea of the size of them. The male has a golden mustache. And again, they mostly give pollinator services to non-native Asian-based plants that are here. But if there's any redeeming quality of them, I don't know if it's redeeming as such, because the carpenter bees, genus Xylocopa, are a very important pollinating big native bee. But many of you will have damage to your soffit and fascia of your home and to picnic tables and all sorts of things where carpenter bee burrows have been excavated by female carpenter bees. And we'll get to them in a minute here. But what this bee does, the giant resin bee, it will go in and take over or run out the larger carpenter bees and take over their excavated burrows. It doesn't help. In other words, it runs the big carpenter bees off, but the damage is already done. These bees do not excavate like the carpenter bees do. And here's an example of a carpenter bee. The most common species is Xylocopa virginica. And the male always has a white spot on its head, and probably like me, you've had these things guard their territory and get right in front of you and just hover there for as long as you want them to hover to guard their territory. Perhaps some of you, like me, have seen a female on a flower. I've seen them on a lilac bush before, and then 3 or 4 males like this are trying their best to get to that female on the flowers of that plant. So so not truly a bumblebee, it is in the family Apidae. Sometimes when we see these with kids when we're on field trips here at Belmont, I'll say, "Don't you see the little carpenter belt they have on?" Just to see if they'll get it really quick there. And so here they're generalist, of course. The females, what a female looks like. There's the male with that clear white or yellow face to it. But they are good buzz pollinators, just like the bumblebees are. All right, let's look at the longhorn bees. They're another group in the big family Apidae, and this is the genus Melissoides. Of course, you know that the Greek name for bee is Melissa, and so they tend to have long, especially the males, not the females, have these really long antennae. So you've probably seen these before on flower heads. This looks like maybe a violet that this one's on. And of course, within that same subfamily, Apidae, you have the digger bees. And the digger bees tend to have these bands across the abdomen, light contrasting bands across the abdomen here. And so the genus Anthophora is a very common one. So within that big family Apidae, the digger bees. This implies, of course, by the name that they're solitary bees like most of them are, and they do dig burrows in the ground to provision with pollen, because remember, almost all the native bees are after pollen, and they, of course, are very good pollinators as well. You can see the femur of the rear leg of this bee here. I think on the other side you see a scopa where it would be able to carry pollen. Okay, maybe some of you have heard of another type of digger bee called a chimney bee. And Bart's probably still out there, Bart Jones, when we were down at the farm in Summertown looking at their prairie and adding to their list of insects and other arthropods. There was a graduate student there from the University of Tennessee, and this is the bee. I think this is a species that she is working on for her project, and so she was very proud to tell us about these. And I remembered they're called chimney bees for 2 reasons. They actually do form these little chimney-like structures. They're gregarious. A lot of them can make their chimney burrows very close to each other, but they're not social. The only social bees are the bumblebees. The only social native bees. The non-native honeybees, of course, are social as well. So this is what these are cute little bees. They don't sting you. You almost cannot make them sting you. They'll try to bite you if they feel threatened. And another reason I call them chimney bees is because on the old house I grew up in Bedford County, there's a chimney there, and for years I've walked by there, and there have been these bees flying in and out of it. And they haven't bothered me. And I realized when I met this graduate student just recently, just this year, that it must be this species that is there. So so they're neat little bees. You've probably seen them, or just be on the lookout for them. Okay, the bumblebees and carpenter bees, of course, are these big buzz pollinators. Here's an example of a bumblebee over here with some pollen on its scopa. Of course, this is the male carpenter bee. I showed you something similar to that a while ago. There are some other things that we could look at as well that are considered in the same family. Another one, the longhorn bees. This is the Pruno squash bees. Again, Holly Taylor took this photograph. And of course, this is a domesticated squash, but native squash occurs from Central America up into North America, I believe. The paleobotanists have studied this, and so this bee has been its pollinator all the way through to domestication, I'm sure. Very, very good pollinators. Here's a sunflower bee that perhaps you've seen before too. Again, another good photograph by Holly Taylor, our associate state naturalist, and so a very striking bee. If you've never seen, there's a few sunflowers blooming right now. Just look at a few of them, see if you can see if you can spot this bee. Here is the hibiscus turret bee. Again, these are photographs that came from Holly off her Facebook page, but she's has excellent photographic skills these days, and you can see one on the hibiscus. And again, it's in the Apidae. It's related to it's different genus from the genus Bombus, but in the family Apidae, subfamily Apinae. And here is a bumblebee with a scopa covered with orange pollen on St. John's wort. I think this is golden St. John's wort, if I'm not mistaken. So a good example of a native bee that gathers pollen. This one is not necessarily a sonicating bee or a buzz pollinating bee. It can be if it's in something like a squash flower in your garden, but this is just one that's collecting the abundant pollen from St. John's wort. So just a few slides to kind of finish up this part. I'm sure folks will have some questions, but if you're wanting to attract native bees, of course, you need to have native wildflowers and shrubs available in your yard, and the right amount of sunlight and shade and such. As you all will know much more about that than I will. But they need to be flowers that will continue to flower and produce pollen and nectar during warm season. So throughout the early days of spring, all the way through the next couple of weeks, even as we 3 weeks as we get into fall and even into mid-October. And of course, these plants have flowers that are going to attract these that have UV reflectance, and usually you can, if you're not sure if these flowers you're considering have this, you can look that up fairly easily. So yellow flowers, blue, purple, white flowers. And of course, it's good to have plants that produce different sized flowers and shapes to attract different native bee species with different tonguelings, and even those nectar robbers to come in. And try not to use invasives. Of course, as we said, there are invasives that produce nectar, but not any pollen rewards that are out there. Always, just like for honeybees in an apiary, you need to have a nearby source of clean water for your bees. You don't need to be too much of a landscaper in that you need to have non-cultivated areas that sort of lie fallow, so that some of the vegetation, as it breaks down, will build up on the ground. So these are good ground nesting sites because many of our native bees are ground nesters. So brush piles, I've got some of those in the woods behind my house. Some standing dead trees also, and rotting logs. I've got some of those. So along with this, I didn't include a picture of this, but maybe some of you currently have or have experimented with these bee hotels. I helped out a Eagle Scout project a couple years ago where they built a rather large one of these that's now installed in a park in Chattanooga. And these, of course, if you work with these before, bees that would use these, and sometimes some of them need to be cleaned out and gotten ready for the next year. And it depends on the species of bees that you're attracting. So, of course, try not to use any pesticides because both the honeybees and the native bees are easily killed by the use of these. Even herbicides can cause some problems for our bees. All right, I want to tell you a story about a plant here as we kind of wrap things up. I was contacted by, I forget one of their names, Todd Crabtree. Many of you know Todd from
He's a member.
From TDEC, right? He's a member. He contacted me a while back with these wonderful photographs of this small wasp called it's Ichneumoniid wasp. It's a huge family of wasps that are mostly parasitic wasps, and there are specialists of these all over the world. And they're better because there's so many species. And this is a rare orchid species. I think I've got the name coming up here in a minute. It's state endangered species. I think one of the common names is the frog orchid. I could be wrong, but you'll see the scientific name come up. And so this wasp was caught in the act of going in there, and it's going to get those pollinia stuck on its head when it comes out. So here's another great photograph of that. So clearly this is a pollinator. If you look closely, you can see the cast skin of an aphid over here too on that state endangered plant. And so he wanted to know if I could help with this. And I like to be a facilitator. I'm more of a generalist entomologist, and I get excited about these things, but I'm not really a specialist on wasp. And so I did look at bugguide.net and got down to what I thought was the genus name, at least, of this. And I got another North American ictomodic worker to kind of agree with me. But then we went to a kind of a world authority over in the UK, over in England, and he said it was in the genus Pimpla. And so this is what I thought it was at first, another genus, but then this is one that we were able to identify it as. So we know at least the genus name, don't know the species name of this because they didn't select any of them there. But I might just for purposes of looking at the presenter view here, you can see it was Marty Silver and Todd Crabtree that sent this. And this is the scientific name of the orchid, Coeloglossum viride virescens. And some of you may be familiar with that. So I was wrong. I thought it was Diplazon, but then Gavin Broad definitively identified it in the genus Pimpla. Okay, so just a couple of links here. I use bugguide.net quite a bit to help me get down to some identifications. Some of it's partially inaccurate, but most of it's very good. I believe it's out of Kansas State University. Forestry Images is also a good place to go to look for images in the Bugwood network as a part of that. And these are just extension entomology publications from University of Tennessee, Knoxville. You can go to this link and see and look at a number of things, mostly pest related, but some of them not so much so, that including a beekeeping resource as well. And these are just a few selected references. Most of you will know who Doug Tallamy is. And one of the books that I've enjoyed looking at is Attractive Native Pollinators by Mader and others. And the Native Bees will be basics from the USDA Forest Service and the pollinator. So I will I'll stop the share right now and see if folks have any questions, or Karen, if you want to any of those to me.
We do have a few.
Okay.
Back at the very beginning, you were sure about the name of a plant. Anne says she thinks it's a blueberry plant with the pollen robber.
Oh, with the nectar robber on it. Okay.
I thought it might. I also thought it might be blueberry.
Well, I should know that I've got a blueberry or two growing inside my house.
Okay. Excuse me while I mute someone. There we go. Another one from Paul Prill. I was having a conversation at the fair with a honeybee keeper, about 2.5 million bees, and he also has a degree in biology. He said he preferred neonics to sprayed pesticides. I was wondering, since they are systemic and bees will eat the pollen and nectar, and larvae will eat the leaves of the plant, what your opinion of neonics is.
Well, neonicotinoids are a newer group, of course, of pesticides, and they're made by Monsanto Corporation, which some of the native bee and even honeybee keepers have quote unquote referred to as Monsatan because of the what the neonics have been known to do. So I always worry where I have honeybee hives when the farmer at the Sam Davis home comes in there and sprays herbicide. About the only thing I can do is get forewarned by the farmer, get out there and stop up the hives at night, and then leave them stopped up during that morning that they spray, and then open them up. And then hopefully, of course, most honeybees are going to stay in their hive at night and not emerge until the dawn. I don't necessarily have the same opinion as that beekeeper does about the neonicotinoids. They're concerning to me.
Very concerning, in my opinion. Yes. One question was, will the slide presentation and links be available to the public following this lecture? Yes, everything is being recorded. It will be posted on the Tennessee Native Plant Society website, tnps.org.
Okay. And if anybody wanted me to email the PowerPoint to you, I could do that if you'll send me an email. It's steve.murphree@belmont.edu, and my name is spelled Murphree. So steve.murphree@belmont.edu. If the file's too big, I can send it to you through another medium fairly easily.
Thank you. Angela Simpson asks, are there any other wasps that are considered pollinators?
That's a good question, and I'm sure that there are other ichneumoniid wasps that big parasitic wasp family, but that would be pollinators just like the one we saw on that orchid. I'm not really familiar though with other wasp families that would be. I'd say that probably the vespids or the paper wasp are not, because they're carnivores, and so are the yellow jackets. Although I read somewhere, getting ready for today, that yellow jackets will occasionally visit flowers for nectar and can pollinate. So yellow jackets are in that same family, the Vespidae, with the paper wasp. But I don't know about other wasp families. I'd have to do a little more research on that to be sure. Typically, we think about, if it's Hymenoptera, we think bees, native and non-native. But then if it's Diptera, there's a number of different flies that are either attracted because of nectar or pollen rewards, or they're attracted and fooled by those carrion flowers, the ones that smell so bad, right?
Mm-hmm. Kathy comments, Sam Drogue has the best bee photos of all. So I don't know Sam Drogue, but maybe you do.
That sounds somewhat familiar to me. There's some folks that I really had to take my hat off to, because, bees are fast, and, they're not going to stay very long in a flower. And, you could do things like, I guess, and not harm a bee very much by capturing it and slowing it down in the refrigerator for a while and then putting it back out so you can get a decent photograph. But you certainly wouldn't want to try to harm them in that process. I have some good friends who are good close-up photographer friends. One of them is Bob English, who many of you will know.
Yes.
And he has played around with that for quite some time. And of course, a bee that's not going to move, he can get you a 3D image, a stacked image of one. I've seen that, but it's rare that a bee is going to stay still for that long, for that camera to click through that many digital images to make that 3D image for you. But he can do that.
Wow. So he's spreading out from the herps, huh?
Well, he's surprised how many excellent photographs of arthropods that he has. And he's supplied a number of these for articles I write for the Tennessee Conservationists. He and I went out to two different Cedar Glade areas and Cedar Knobs here in Middle Tennessee to get some good photographs of scorpions. And in one case, we were up there photographing south of Murphree, and a sheriff's deputy came up there and asked us what in the world we were doing. And I'm sure we told him, but I'm sure he's had tales to tell his friends for years now about these strange people he met out on at night taking pictures of scorpions.
Oh my. There's a request to send the 2 screens with the resources out to the group. We can't do that, folks, because I don't have a list of who's in the group. There's no way for me to do that. If it will be in the recording, and you can go to the recording on tnps.org and go to the very end and then use your iPhone, your cell phone, and take a photo of it, and you'll have it. Okay? Now, I think that would be the easiest way. Kathy has given some information here. She says, Sam Drogue is with the USGS Patuxent Wildlife Research Center, which is in Maryland on the Chesapeake. Just Google Sam Drogue and you will find his freely available, very high resolution photos. Wow.
That's great to know. Yeah.
That's good
I
news.
I'd written an article for the Conservationist a while back with a friend of mine who used to be the state apiarist, and he's retired now, but it would have been good to get still other good images like that. Of course, with the Conservationists, we tell the photographer that we'll acknowledge them for that photograph. But it's interesting that you mentioned Patuxent. Did that ring a bell with anybody because of Rachel Carson's Silent Spring? Okay, and where they first saw those deaths from DDT, bird deaths, right? Many years ago now.
Yeah, I'm from Maryland. That's home territory.
Mm-hmm.
And out to the wildlife refuge many times. Lots of unique and unusual things happening there.
I'd like to visit sometime.
You'd enjoy it. Toby Koosman comments that he's seen many wasps on flowers, both social and solitary.
Okay, so wasp, if it's social, it's probably going to be one of the Vespids then, like a paper wasp landing there. They do. They're after moisture sometimes, and they can be getting some nectar, perhaps. I doubt they're after pollen, but so it would just be probably just where they're seeking that, or else they're waiting. If like the yellow jackets are carnivorous, they'll grab a pollinator that lands there, right, and take it back to provision their nest.
Okay.
And of course, yellow jackets are always fun to fool with. I tell you, they're fast. Let's just say that.
Okay.
And they're very, very aggressive and persistent if you get into a nest of them.
Kathy provided a link to the photos. So if anybody wants that link, it's listed
in the chat. Good.
In chat. Susan Brown asks, how can we provide water for the bees? Can they drink from a bird bath? And I can say positively, yes.
Yes, they can.
For the bird bath all the time.
And I'll tell you something funny. We've got the former president of Belmont has like 3 or 4 hives on the roof of my building here. And those bees in the summertime go down to one of the fountains along Wedgwood Avenue in front of, that would be Inman Hall. I think that's Inman anyway. And it's tilted just a little bit so that there's a nice flat edge with the water out there, and the bees honeybees just line up around that and drink. It's a really easy spot. Now, other things you can do, you can take like a pan and put some rocks in it, and then add water to that, or just let rainwater fill it. But you don't want it such that the bees get in there and drown. You want something that they can perch on and get their water. And be quite honest, it doesn't have to be super clean water. They'll get it out of a cow's hoof print, or where there's water inside of a cow pat. They're not too particular about it.
Yes, I agree. I have a second bird bath, a small one with rocks in it, and I put the water in there, and I was just watching them today. They will sit on a rock or on the edge of the bird bath, and they'll lean right in. They'll go right up to the edge of the water and drink. And as long as it's not being splashed on them, they're fine.
Right. We've got one of those in our backyard now that my wife recently installed that has a little solar panel on it, and it shoots water up in the top. It's nice to look at, but the bees don't like it because it sprays them, right? So
I've had one, and this year we didn't put it out because there were several reasons this year. And I've
mm,
seen a lot more of the bees there too. They are now, because I didn't see any of them there before. And it gives the
right,
birds more room for bathing anyway, so. Oh,
right.
well.
There is a reason to have it for the birds too.
Yeah. The hummingbirds like the spray, and so
Oh,
do
they
some
do.
of the others. Mhm.
It's good. I didn't realize that.
Um, Another question here from Angela Simpson. What's the lifespan of a bumblebee? I see so many of
Okay.
them lying dead on the sidewalk and wondered if it was due to pesticides or if they naturally died off.
They, if it's the most long-lived of the bumblebee line is the queen that can overwinter, and so it will the queen will go down into the leaf litter or get it to a protected area and stay through the winter. And every year she's got to start a new colony. She's going to start laying eggs and sending. She's got to go out and forage some herself at first to get enough energy to keep going, and then her offspring begin to continue to go out and um, um, get pollen. And I don't know if you ever looked inside a bumblebee hive before. I had to look at one because my son had left a carpet rolled up on our back patio, and I kept seeing these bees come in and out, and they were getting kind of aggressive. So I did have to put on my bee suit and take it back in the woods and open it up. But you can see little honey pots inside of the structure of a bumblebee hive. I'd never looked at one that closely before. My only experience before would be seeing them when I was hauling hay or straw as a young man, and up running into them into a barn somewhere. And what that usually meant was I was running out of the barn. But the queen will live the longest. The worker bees, just like worker honeybees, will only live a few weeks, and they're, of course, the queen's continuing to lay eggs and produce more of her progeny to grow up the size of that bumblebee colony for that warm season. Now, of course, in the honeybees, the queen bee lives longer than 1 year, can live up to 3, maybe 4 years before
Wow.
she gets superseded. That means that she doesn't produce enough queen substance to control the hive anymore, and so they start to raise some other queens. Those queens hatch out, and one of them kills the others, all the others, and then she stays in the hive, but the old queen leaves with half of the hive, and that's the swarm that normally happens in March, April, May. And I have caught a number of swarms, one here on the Belmont campus this year.
Wow. One comment was, I have a plate with stones that my master gardener group had as a craft for butterflies, and many bees also go to it. So
That's
yes,
good.
it does work for both.
Mhm.
Roberta asks, do bees have predators?
Yes, they do. There are a number of other insects that can be predators of bees. The most significant ones I can think of are the dragonflies. There'll be some others too that like the yellow jackets. I mentioned them before. They will prey on bees, but the thing that gives any beekeeper, a honey beekeeper like me, pause is the queen has to go out, fly out of the hive at least once a year, fly way up. The male bees from that hive or other hives nearby called drones, it's their time. So they fly out with that queen, but when she's up in there, she's very vulnerable in the air, about to mate with drones, and that sometimes is when one of those big green darner dragonflies, one of those larger ones, can sometimes nab and prey on the queen bee. So the whole hive is in trouble when the queen's gone in a social insect colony, of course.
Mhm. Julie Speedy asks, do you know what happened? Do you happen to know Which bee pollinates blackberries? Hopefully a native one. We had low pollination last year in Kentucky.
Is that right? I'm not sure that I know exactly which one would pollinate it. I would say honeybees would go to them, but some of the medium-sized to smaller native bees might as well. I mean, they're a very showy flower. They're white, and they. I can't say that I've ever tried to see how much nectar or how odoriferous it is. Maybe some of you have from blackberries. Probably because I didn't want to get scratched to try to get there and get at them. But
They are
they are
sweet smelling, but not very strongly such.
not strongly smell, not like honeysuckle or something like that. Okay, so somebody says osmia. Okay, uh, uh, osmia, and they give a specific epithet. That genus Osmia has a number of species, and that's one of the ones that will come to a bee hotel, by the way, too. So you can encourage those bees in your backyard if you want to keep a bee hotel. But yeah, that makes sense that a medium-sized bee that's about 2/3 the size of a honeybee is what an Osmia bee is, would go to blackberry.
All right, Robert Davis asks, if it was rainy when the flowers were in bloom, what might be the cause? That might be the cause of low pollination.
That's a good point, because beekeepers worry when the honey flows on, which mostly is in April and May. When by honey flow, we mean nectar flow. And if it rains a lot during that period, it does wash nectar out of many blossoms. And that's a concern, because the honeybees aren't going to store as much honey up for themselves and the beekeepers to sell. But they're also, the native bees are going to not do as good a job of pollinating because there's not that nectar reward for them. However, remember that the most native bees, though, are after pollen. And that pollen, I think, is going to stick a little better than the nectar during rainfall.
I have a question. The pictures of the bees show them with looking furry. I've never petted a bee. Are those spines or hairs, are they soft or are they sharp?
That's a good question, Karen. They're actually very soft. And so it's almost like I don't know, I saw a photograph, somebody referring to one of our pretty little moths that we see called the rosy maple moth, and he referred to it as a Muppet insect. And so some of these little bees are like little Muppets. And and if you had one that was still on your finger or whatever, you could reach down there and just run your finger down its abdomen before it takes off, and it would be very soft.
Interesting, because they look like little teddy bears with wings in some way.
They do. And sometimes in humid environments or when the dew falls, they will get moisture droplets all over those hairs. And in some cases, I think they collect water that way.
Okay. Well, I want to say thank you. Are there any more questions? If so, unmute yourself and speak up. Any final questions? Here's
I
one.
wondered if he might speak to the looming insect apocalypse that we've heard so much about.
That's a good question. Thank you. I've been doing some reading on this, and of course, the concern came out of Europe and these long-term, multi-decade studies over there where they had light traps and such, and of course, even here in the United States, there have been some studies that seem rather alarming about loss of numbers of some of these species of insects. Of course, insects are so ubiquitous and so numerous in species, so diverse, that some of them we know very little about how many are actually out there. So even big showy insects like the Luna moth, we think the Luna moth's kind of in trouble, but we don't know that for sure, definitively. But it is concerning to me when I see that, And what some people would refer to just in typical parlance as the windshield index. So you're driving around on a summer night, and you almost never have to use that windshield fluid, do you? Like we did, or
anymore.
if you're like David Hill and me, and you're riding your motorcycle around at night, you don't have to worry about getting them between your teeth, right?
Right.
So it is concerning, and there are the major universities with entomology programs have a lot of graduate students who are doing some projects on these right now, trying, especially here in the States, to find out more. Because as again, I'll tip my hat to E.O. Wilson, Edward Wilson from Harvard, who said that the insects are the little things that run the world. And so they're small, but they're very, very, very important in food chains, food webs, within ecosystems. And, we can lose insect species that maybe have not even been new to science yet, but yet had some important role out there. Even here in temperate climates like Tennessee, you don't have to go to the rainforest, to see all of that diversity. You can see a lot still here in the States.
Quite a lot. There's a comment from Kathy she says, an entomologist at Cornell University, Professor Brian Danforth, says there are 2 to 3 times better pollinators than honeybees. An individual visit by a native bee is actually worth far more than an individual visit by a honeybee. Danforth added, honeybees are more interested in the nectar.
That's exactly right. Honeybees they are basically, they're like cows in a way. They're domesticated in a way, even though they're a wild species still. And they always surprise us beekeepers, and they don't always do what we think they're going to do. But they are heavy on nectar because they have to build it up as energy for their colony because they have to overwinter. The native bees mostly are solitary, except for the bumblebees, and which are after some nectar, of course, and pollen. But the solitary bees, the ground nesters and such, they're using almost exclusively pollen to provision their nest with. So they are better pollinators.
The thing that I've heard Sam Droege say about native bees is that they are single moms, and that because they're solitary and they have these individual tubes or nests that they build, that they don't defend it. And that's why they don't sting, because that's just not something they've evolved to need to do. So they're very gentle.
I'm glad you pointed that out. I've heard that analogy before, that that's why that they don't necessarily come out and boil out of the ground at you or anything like that, like if you stepped on a yellow jacket nest.
Yeah.
Paul Prill has a copy of The Insect Crisis he's holding up.
Yeah, this book came out at the beginning of this year, and it's got research through the end of 2020, essentially. Obviously, there's always lag time from the time that you finish your manuscript till it finally gets to the bookseller. But it's a very well written, not overly apocalyptic language about the kinds of problems that insects generally are facing, not just the bees.
And it's a worldwide issue. I think that's what struck me in reading the book.
Yeah, and he does. He's got research from pretty much every continent. So
yes, everywhere.
And
he's very careful to cover it all.
Read that book myself. That's good.
It is highly recommended. Highly recommended. It's a good sequel to Doug Tallamy's work, in that it goes into much greater depth, and it's study after study after study after study. So it's undeniable that there's an issue from the way he's written the book. There's just no way to say poo-poo. It's, you're imagining it. No.
We had a speaker here at Belmont a few years ago. He wrote a book called The Natural West, and he quoted, I think it was Thoreau, that made these comments about, it may have been Thoreau, that he wished that that future generations would be able to see a complete heaven and a complete earth. But we're not seeing that complete earth even now, because a lot of species are gone, plants and animal and insect, and a lot of people think we can never get rid of all the bugs, but there are plenty of species that are endangered and threatened. And I'm thankful for people like Pandy English, who had worked at Tennessee Wildlife Resources Agency, and now that she's retired from there, but others that keep a list of threatened and endangered insects that are known from the state. She actually co-authored an article with me for the Tennessee Conservationist several years ago about that. So it's depressing in a way, but at the same time, we need to fight to protect these species, and especially their habitats. That they have plenty of habitat, free of pesticides, free of other problems that they face from air pollution and such, water pollution.
Yeah, you got it.
And concrete.
Yeah.
Exactly.
There, on that wonderful note, there are a lot of thank yous listed in the comment section, Steve. So very interesting. Thanks for sharing your knowledge and passion. I want to thank you very much for
You're welcome.
this. Has been delightful, intriguing,
I'm a medical
interesting.
entomologist, but not necessarily. I'm still learning a lot about pollinators. And
We're all learning.
Yeah.
You're not the only one.
You have other people in the state who are very good like with this. And so if anybody knows Holly Taylor, I'd highly recommend that you get with her. She's excellent at this area too.
Okay. Well, I'm going to be saying goodnight to everyone.